A starving dog, scarred from years of abuse, limped through the freezing streets, his past haunting him like a shadow. But when a former soldier took him in, neither of them knew that danger was still lurking. 2 years later, the past came knocking, and what the dog did next left everyone speechless. How far can loyalty go, and what happens when justice isn't enough? Stay with us to uncover the shocking truth. The city was a graveyard of broken dreams, its streets lined with shadows darker than the filth coating the pavement. Cold winds cut through the alleys like unseen blades, rattling old fire escapes and howling between the towering buildings that loomed over the narrow streets. Snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes dancing under the flickering glow of a dying street lamp, but the cold was the least of his concerns. Cerberus dragged his battered body through the alley, his breath visible in the frozen air. His once mighty frame was now gaunt, ribs pressing against his matted black-grey fur. Old wounds, poorly healed, left jagged scars across his body, and fresh cuts bled sluggishly down his legs. He barely noticed the pain anymore. Hunger gnawed at him like an old enemy, its constant presence forcing him forward step by step. His head lowered, nose twitching as he followed the faint scent of discarded food. The stench of rot and oil filled the air. But there was something else, something edible. He limped toward a dumpster overflowing with half-eaten meals and torn garbage bags. Desperation overpowered his pride. Lowering his head, he pushed his snout between the refuse, searching for anything that could keep him alive for another night. Then he heard them. A cruel, mocking whistle. Cerberus froze, his body instantly tense, his ears flicked, his tired eyes darting toward the shadows at the end of the alley. A group of men stood there, their figures distorted by the dim, flickering light. "Look what we have here," one of them sneered, stepping forward. A familiar scent drifted toward him, sweat, alcohol, and something else, something worse. It was them, the ones who had made him a monster, the ones who had chained him in a rusted cage, who had forced him into the ring over and over again until all he knew was pain and the taste of his own blood. One of the men, stocky with a thick scar across his cheek, picked up a metal pipe and slammed it against the dumpster. The sound rang through the alley like a gunshot. "You cost us a lot of money, mutt," he growled, stepping closer. "Should have put you down when we had the chance." Cerberus snarled, baring his teeth. Instinct screamed at him to fight, to defend himself, but he had nothing left to give. His legs trembled from exhaustion, and his vision swam from blood loss. A second man, taller and leaner, cracked his knuckles. "Think he remembers us?" he chuckled. Only one way to find out. They moved in. The first blow struck hard against his ribs, sending him crashing into the side of the dumpster. Pain exploded through his body, but Cerberus refused to fall. He scrambled to his feet, but another strike came, this time to his shoulder, knocking him back down. The world spun. Boots kicked against his side, hands grabbed at his scruff. Someone yanked his head back by his torn ear, laughing as he struggled. Then everything stopped. A voice, deep and sharp like a knife cutting through steel. "That's enough." The men turned, and for the first time Cerberus saw him. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley, partially illuminated by the dying streetlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy leather jacket worn with age. A hood shadowed his face, but Cerberus could feel his presence, calm, yet filled with something dangerous. The group hesitated, sizing him up. "This ain't your business, man," the scarred one warned. The stranger didn't move. He simply watched, not with pity, not with anger, just observation, as if he was calculating. Cerberus locked eyes with him, and for a brief moment something passed between them. Not words, not understanding, something deeper. A test. Then, just as quickly, the man turned his gaze back to the group. "You should leave," he said. The stocky man tightened his grip on the pipe. Or what? For a moment, there was silence. Then the stranger took one slow step forward. It was nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive. But the men tensed, as if they felt something shift in the air. Cerberus, even in his dazed state, could tell this was no ordinary man. One of the men, the younger one in the back, shifted uneasily. "Come on, man. We got better things to do." The scarred one hesitated, then spat on the ground. He shot one last glare at Cerberus before stepping back. Not worth it. Slowly, the group retreated, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. And then, it was just the two of them. The man turned, stepping fully into the light now. His face was rough, lined with experience. His eyes, shadowed but sharp, held no sympathy, only consideration. Cerberus watched him warily, his body still crouched low, ready for another attack. But the man didn't move closer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something. A small piece of food, a chunk of dried meat. He knelt down, placing it on the cold pavement a few feet away, then stood up again. He didn't call to Cerberus. He didn't try to coax him forward. He simply turned and walked away. Cerberus lay there, panting heavily, watching the man disappear into the entrance of what appeared to be an old auto repair shop. The door creaked open, then shut behind him, leaving only silence in his wake. The smell of the meat drifted toward him. Hunger warred with suspicion. After a long moment, Cerberus dragged himself forward. Each step felt like lifting stones, but he managed to reach the food. He sniffed it. No poison, no trick, just food. He devoured it in seconds. Then, exhausted, he lay his head down on the cold ground. For the first time in years, he closed his eyes without fear of what would come next. And from behind the cracked window of the repair shop, Dante watched him in silence. The city remained unchanged, cold, ruthless, and indifferent. Snow still blanketed the sidewalks in patches of grey slush, and the dim streetlights flickered like dying stars against the endless black of the night. The air carried the scent of gasoline, rust, and something stale, remnants of a place long forgotten by those who still had something to live for. Cerberus had survived another night. His body still ached from the attack in the alley. His ribs, once protected by muscle and strength, now jutted out beneath his tattered black-grey fur. His shoulder throbbed where the pipe had struck him, a deep bruise forming beneath his skin. He should have been dead. But he wasn't. And it was because of him, the man in the leather jacket. Cerberus didn't trust humans. He had learned through blood and agony that men were nothing but masters of cruelty. They had bred him, starved him, beaten him, thrown him into fights where survival was the only law. And when he was no longer of use, they had tossed him aside like garbage. So why had that man done nothing? Why had he placed food before him and simply walked away? That question gnawed at him, even as hunger clawed at his insides. The cold made it worse, burning away what little energy he had left. And so, as the hours stretched into another endless night, Cerberus made a decision. The repair shop stood as it always had, old, rusting, abandoned in everything but function. Its neon sign was long dead, the only light coming from within, where the glow of a single lamp spilled onto the cracked pavement. Cerberus crept forward. His paws barely made a sound against the icy ground. His instincts screamed trap, but hunger drowned out caution. The scent was still there, faint but real. Meat. Fresh. He moved closer to the door. The food was waiting for him. A small piece of dried meat, just like the night before, placed exactly where it had been the first time. No strings, no cages, no tricks. Cerberus hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the darkened window of the shop. No movement. Still, he waited. Minutes passed. Then, finally, he inched forward and grabbed the meat. It was gone in seconds, barely enough to dull the hunger, but it was real. He lingered for a moment. His eyes flicked toward the door again. Nothing. And then he left. It became a routine. Every night, the food was there. Every night, the man was not. Dante never stepped outside, never called to him, never tried to touch him. He simply left the food, as if offering a quiet invitation without expectation. And for some reason, that unsettled Cerberus more than anything, because this wasn't how humans worked. They demanded something, a touch, a trick, a leash, a fight. But this man didn't. Cerberus didn't understand it. And yet, night after night, he came back. One night, snow fell heavier than usual. Cerberus had curled up in an abandoned doorway for shelter, but the wind howled through the streets, stabbing through his thin coat like knives. His paws were numb, his breath came in ragged puffs. When he made his way to the repair shop, the usual piece of meat was waiting. But something else caught his attention. The door to the shop was slightly ajar. A soft, golden glow spilled out onto the pavement. The scent of oil, steel, and something warm drifted toward him. Cerberus froze. Every instinct told him to run, never step into a human's den, but the cold was unbearable. The wind lashed at his body, sinking deep into his bones, threatening to drag him into an endless sleep. He took a single step forward, then another. His nose twitched. No immediate danger. With hesitant, deliberate steps, Cerberus stepped inside. The warmth hit him instantly. His muscles stiffened, unsure if the change in temperature was relief or threat. His eyes darted around the room, tools scattered on metal workbenches, the faint hum of a heater in the corner, a cot shoved against the far wall with a tattered blanket draped over it. And then he saw him. Dante. He was sitting at a small table, one boot propped on a chair, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He hadn't looked up yet, as if he knew Cerberus was there, but didn't want to startle him. Cerberus remained near the doorway, his body low to the ground, ready to bolt at any sign of movement. Dante took a sip of his drink. Then, without looking up, he muttered, "Close the door. It's freezing out." Cerberus's ears flicked. He didn't move. Dante sighed, finally turning his gaze toward him. His expression was unreadable. No threat, no pity, just acknowledgement. "You planning on staying there all night?" he asked. Silence. Dante leaned back slightly. "Suit yourself." He reached for something on the table, a small piece of dried meat. He placed it on the floor inside this time, just a few feet from where Cerberus stood. Then he went back to his drink. Cerberus stared at the meat. A test. The cold still clung to his fur, his paws numb. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to need this. But he was so damn tired. Finally, cautiously, he stepped forward and took the meat. Dante didn't react, didn't reach for him, didn't even speak again. Cerberus turned and left, not running but not staying either. As he slipped back into the night, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, just uncertainty. Far across the city, in a different part of the underworld, a man named Vincent sat in a dimly lit room. He leaned back in his leather chair, a cigarette burning between his fingers, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. His eyes, dark and calculating, skimmed over the photograph in his hand. A surveillance image. A dog, scarred, lean, unmistakable. His dog. "Looks like you survived, you little bastard," he murmured. His lips curled into a smirk as he tapped ash into an overflowing tray. Let's see how long that lasts. The sound of rain hitting the metal roof was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It had been drizzling since early evening, the kind of rain that didn't come in torrents, but soaked everything in a relentless, miserable chill. Inside the auto shop, Dante sat on an old stool, watching the flames dance in a rusted metal barrel he used for heat. Cerberus lay a few feet away, his body curled up, but his eyes still open, half watching Dante, half watching the shadows shifting along the walls. The dog no longer flinched at every sound, no longer stayed crouched in the corner like a beaten creature waiting for the next blow. That was progress. Dante exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together near the warmth. "Cerberus," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet hum of the rain. The dog lifted his head slightly. "That's what I'm calling you," Dante continued, tilting his head toward him. "Fits, doesn't it? A beast from hell, scarred, surviving things it shouldn't have. Yeah, that suits you." Cerberus didn't react, but he didn't reject it either. His name had been erased long ago, lost in the brutality of blood-stained cages and cold concrete floors. Now at least he had one again. A ghost from a different war. Days passed, then weeks. The routine stayed the same. Cerberus came and went as he pleased, but he always returned. The shop became a silent agreement between them, a place where neither had to explain themselves. But one night, something shifted. Dante sat on the shop floor, an old bottle of whiskey in his grip. He wasn't drunk, but the burn in his throat helped take the edge off the memories clawing at the back of his mind. Cerberus sat nearby, his body relaxed, but his ears still tuned to every sound. "You ever wonder," Dante muttered, "if you were just supposed to disappear?" The dog didn't move, but his gaze locked onto him. Dante scoffed, shaking his head. "Yeah. That's stupid, right? Of course not. We survive because we have to, not because someone planned it that way." He leaned back against the workbench, letting out a slow breath. "I was a mercenary," he admitted. "Not a good guy, not a hero. Just a weapon for hire. Contracts, money, orders. That was it, until the wrong job went bad." Cerberus blinked, as if considering his words. Dante smirked bitterly. "I was set up. Thought I had a team, thought we had a plan. Turns out I was just the loose end they needed gone." The whiskey bottle clinked as he set it down. His hands instinctively moved to his ribs, brushing against the scars beneath his shirt. "Got shot, left for dead. Barely made it out. By the time I did, the whole damn world had moved on, and no one was looking for me except the wrong people." Silence. Then a low sound. Cerberus shifting closer. The faintest rustling of fur against the cold floor. Dante exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. "Guess we got that in common, huh?" He didn't reach for the dog, didn't try to touch him. He just sat there, staring into the flames of the barrel. And for the first time, Cerberus didn't leave. Vincent's hunt begins. Far across the city, Vincent sat in the back room of a dimly lit bar, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and stale beer, the kind of place where secrets were traded like currency. He leaned over a table, a spread of photographs laid out before him. Each image was grainy but clear enough. The auto shop, the hooded man stepping outside, the dog following close behind. His dog. Vincent exhaled slowly, tapping the ash from his cigarette. "So that's where you ran off to," he muttered. The man across from him, a nervous-looking informant with a scar running down his jaw, fidgeted in his seat. "That guy, he keeps to himself, doesn't talk much, just runs that shop, fixes cars for cash, no real ties to anyone." Vincent smiled, slow and predatory. "No ties, huh?" The informant swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do?" Vincent flicked a photo toward him, the one of Dante stepping out of the shop at night. "Find out everything about him," he ordered. "Where he goes, who he talks to, and when the time's right." He crushed the cigarette into the ashtray. "Make sure he understands that dog belongs to me." The warning. The first sign came unexpectedly. Dante had left early one morning, heading into town for supplies. The store wasn't far, but he never left the shop unattended for long. He had learned long ago that complacency was the first step toward death. When he returned, something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar. His fingers twitched toward the knife hidden inside his coat as he pushed the door open. The shop smelled different, not just oil and rust, but something off, something human. Dante's gaze swept across the room. Nothing looked stolen. Nothing looked out of place. But as he stepped inside, he noticed something on the workbench. A cigarette, still burning. Someone had been here. His grip tightened on the knife, his mind racing through possibilities. Vincent. It had to be him, or someone working for him. Dante took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed to think. What had they done? What had they been looking for? His eyes flicked toward the corner where Cerberus usually slept. The dog wasn't there. A fresh wave of unease washed over him. Then, a sound from outside, the soft crunch of paws against gravel. Dante turned just as Cerberus stepped in through the open door, his fur damp from the cold. The dog paused, sniffing the air. His body tensed, his eyes narrowing as he caught the lingering scent of whoever had been there before. Dante met his gaze. "They were looking for you," he murmured. Cerberus didn't move, but his ears flicked back, his body language shifting into something almost human. Understanding. "They won't stop," Dante continued, running a hand through his hair. "Not now." He exhaled slowly, his mind calculating next steps. He had spent years avoiding conflict, keeping to himself, staying off the radar. But it looked like the past wasn't done with him yet. And for the first time in years, Dante found himself preparing for war. The night carried an uneasy stillness. The city was never truly quiet, but tonight, something felt different, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Dante sat at his workbench, cleaning the slide of an old handgun. It hadn't been fired in years, but old habits never died. The faint scent of oil and metal mixed with the gasoline fumes that clung to the walls. Cerberus lay near the entrance, his dark eyes flicking toward the open door every few moments. He was restless tonight. So was Dante. He didn't like coincidences. He didn't like uninvited guests. And he sure as hell didn't like the feeling creeping up his spine, the kind that told him something was coming. Then he heard it. A knock. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 soft raps against the metal garage door. Dante set the gun down. His fingers flexed, muscles tensing as he stood. Cerberus had already risen to his feet, his ears perked, his body rigid. Slowly, Dante walked to the door, pulling it open just enough to see the figure standing outside. It was a kid. Couldn't be more than 16. Thin, with sharp, skittish eyes that darted left and right, scanning the alley like he expected someone to jump him. His hoodie was too big for his frame, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. He looked like someone who hadn't had a real meal in weeks. "Who the hell are you?" Dante asked, his voice low. The kid hesitated. His fingers twitched inside his hoodie pocket. "I need to talk to you," he muttered. Dante didn't move. He didn't trust sudden visitors. He didn't trust anyone. But then the kid said something that made his stomach tighten. "It's about Vincent." A traitor to the wrong people. Dante let the kid inside, but only just. He stayed near the door, keeping himself positioned between the boy and anything valuable. Cerberus stayed close, his dark eyes locked onto the stranger, reading him in ways only an animal could. The kid swallowed hard. His gaze flicked between Dante and the dog. "I know you got him," he said, jerking his chin toward Cerberus. "Vincent knows too." Dante didn't react, but his mind was already running through every possible scenario. The kid shifted uncomfortably under the weight of Dante's silence. "Look, man, I'm not here to screw you over. I need out, all right? I worked for Vincent. I know how he operates, and I know when he wants something, he doesn't stop until he gets it." Dante finally spoke. "What's your name?" "Elliot." Dante studied him for a long moment. "And why the hell should I believe a damn thing you say, Elliot?" The boy flinched at the sharpness in his voice, but he didn't back down. "Because if I wanted to set you up, I wouldn't have come alone." Dante narrowed his eyes. He hated how much sense that made. Elliot continued, voice lower now, more desperate. "Vincent doesn't care about money. Not really. He's got plenty of it. But that dog," he glanced at Cerberus, then back at Dante, "that's about control. That's about making a point." Dante exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. "And what's his plan?" Elliot hesitated before answering. "He's sending people to watch you, to watch this place. They're waiting to see if you slip up. If they find an opening, they'll take the dog and put you in the ground." Silence. Dante knew this was coming. He had seen the signs, the cigarette in the shop, the feeling of being watched. He just hadn't expected it to happen this fast. Elliot fidgeted. "Look, I told you what I know. You don't owe me anything, all right? But I need a way out of this. I don't want to be next on his list." Dante leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "And what do you expect me to do about that?" Elliot's jaw tensed. "I don't know, but I figured if anyone knew how to disappear, it'd be you." That made Dante pause, because the kid was right. Run or fight? For the first time in years, Dante felt like a hunted man again. He had spent so long keeping his head down, staying out of sight, pretending that the past couldn't find him if he just ignored it long enough. Now, that illusion was gone. He had a choice. Run, pack up, leave this place behind like he had left everything else. Keep moving, stay ahead of the people looking for him. That's what he had always done. Or dash, stay, and deal with this the only way he knew how. Dante's gut twisted at the thought. He wasn't afraid of fighting. He had done it his whole damn life. But he wasn't reckless. He knew what war looked like. He knew what it did to people. And if he stayed, that's exactly what this would become. A war. He glanced at Cerberus. The dog was watching him carefully, waiting as if he already knew that something was shifting in the air. Dante took a breath, then turned back to Elliot. "You got a place to stay?" Elliot looked surprised by the question. "No," Dante nodded. "Then you stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Elliot hesitated, then gave a small, almost disbelieving nod. "All right." Dante didn't trust him yet, not fully, but something told him the kid wasn't lying. And right now, he needed every piece of information he could get. The shadows close in. The rain had stopped by the time night fell completely. The city was blanketed in fog, thick and heavy, swallowing the streetlights and muffling the distant sounds of sirens. Inside the shop, Dante lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. Elliot had curled up on a makeshift bed of old blankets, already half asleep. Cerberus lay by the door, on guard. Dante closed his eyes. Just a few hours of rest. Then, a growl, low, deep, dangerous. Dante was on his feet in an instant. Cerberus was already at the door, ears pinned back, teeth bared in a silent snarl. His body was tense, muscles coiled, ready to launch. Something was out there. Dante grabbed his gun and moved to the window, carefully peeling back the curtain just enough to see into the night. At first, he saw nothing, just the alley, dark and empty. Then, movement. A figure, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, a shape that stayed in the shadows, watching. Dante's grip tightened on the gun. Not yet. Not until they made a move. He let the curtain fall back into place. His jaw clenched. This was it. They were being watched. And it was only a matter of time before the real fight began. The storm had been building all evening. Dante could feel it in the air, the sharp scent of ozone, the way the wind howled between the buildings, rattling loose metal and whispering warnings through the cracks in the shop's walls. He stood in the middle of the garage, rolling his shoulders, stretching muscles that had long since learned to brace for violence. He had spent years trying to outrun this kind of trouble, but now it was here, knocking on his damn door. And Dante knew one thing for certain. He wasn't running anymore. The first shot. It happened fast. One moment, there was only the sound of rain hammering the roof. The next, the front door exploded inward, sending shards of wood flying across the room. Dante barely had time to move before the first gunshot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet tore through the air, embedding itself in the metal tool chest behind him. Then they swarmed in. Vincent's men, 5 of them, maybe 6, armed with guns, crowbars, and the kind of confidence that only came from thinking they had already won. Dante didn't hesitate. He grabbed the closest thing within reach, a heavy wrench, and threw it. The tool spun through the air, striking the first attacker square in the face with a sickening crack. The man crumpled instantly. Then they were on him. A fist slammed into his ribs. Another grabbed at his jacket, trying to pin him down. Dante twisted, using his attacker's momentum against him, slamming the man into a metal workbench. Pain exploded across the back of his head as a crowbar clipped his skull. His vision swam, but he didn't fall, because falling meant dying. Cerberus unleashed. Through the chaos, a snarl ripped through the room, deep, guttural, filled with rage. Cerberus launched from the shadows, his massive frame colliding with one of Vincent's men. The man barely had time to scream before the dog's jaws clamped onto his arm, tearing through flesh and muscle. The others hesitated. They had heard stories about this dog, about what it used to be. And now it was loose. Cerberus tore through them like a beast from another world. He moved with terrifying precision, a living weapon forged in pain and blood. Dante fought alongside him, using everything within reach, a tire iron, a socket wrench, his own fists, to take down whoever got too close. But they kept coming. A gun went off. The bullet whizzed past Dante's ear, close enough that he felt the heat of it. Cerberus snapped at another attacker's leg, pulling him down with a pained scream. Then, through the madness, a familiar voice. Enough. Vincent's wrath. Vincent stepped through the wrecked doorway, calm, almost amused. He wore his usual smirk, the kind that made Dante's blood boil. His hands were empty, but Dante knew better. Vincent never showed up unarmed. The remaining men pulled back, their expressions shifting from bloodlust to obedience. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a message. Vincent tilted his head. "You put up a hell of a fight," he admitted, his voice casual. "Almost made me think you had a chance." Dante's breath was heavy, his body aching. But he wasn't done yet. "I've got plenty left," he growled. Vincent chuckled. "That's cute." Then he moved. Fast. Dante barely had time to react before Vincent's fist slammed into his ribs, knocking the wind from his lungs. Another blow, a sharp elbow to his jaw, sent him stumbling. Vincent wasn't just some street thug. He knew how to fight, and worse, he enjoyed it. Dante swung at him, but Vincent dodged, countering with a brutal knee to the stomach. Dante hit the ground, coughing, vision blurring. He tried to push himself up, but Vincent was already there, towering over him. Then a gun. Vincent pulled a pistol from his waistband, pressing the barrel against Dante's forehead. The room went still. A sacrifice in blood. Cerberus moved before he thought. The gunshot echoed through the garage, deafening. Dante barely had time to process what had happened before Cerberus collapsed in front of him. Blood. A dark pool spreading across the floor. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Then Dante saw red. Rage. Pure, blinding rage. He lunged. Vincent had just enough time to turn before Dante's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. The gun clattered to the floor. Dante didn't stop. He was on Vincent in seconds, fists pounding into his face again and again, until the man beneath him was barely recognizable. Vincent laughed through broken teeth. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, blood trickling down his chin. Dante grabbed the gun, pressed it against Vincent's skull. His hands were shaking. Vincent grinned. "Go ahead." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, "Dante!" Elliot's voice. Dante turned. The kid stood in the doorway, panting, wide-eyed, terrified. "We have to go," Elliot said. "Now." Dante hesitated. Vincent saw his chance. With a grunt, he swung his leg up, kicking the gun from Dante's grip. It skidded across the floor. Vincent scrambled to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. "This isn't over," he snarled. Then he ran. Dante wanted to chase him, wanted to finish it. But then he saw Cerberus escape through the flames. The shop was a wreck. Blood smeared across the concrete, tools scattered everywhere. Cerberus lay motionless, his breathing shallow, his fur soaked in crimson. Dante dropped to his knees, pressing a hand against the wound. "Stay with me," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Elliot knelt beside him. "We have to move." Dante's jaw clenched. He could hear sirens in the distance. Vincent wouldn't come back tonight, but he would come back. Dante lifted Cerberus, ignoring the burning pain in his body. "Let's go," he said. Elliot led the way through the back exit, into the stormy night. They didn't stop running. Not until the garage, the fight, the blood were nothing but a memory swallowed by the darkness. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the window, filling the room with a dull, rhythmic tapping. The air inside was thick with the scent of antiseptic and blood. Dante crouched beside Cerberus, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The dog's breathing was shallow, his black-grey fur matted with crimson. Dante pressed a rag against the wound, applying pressure, but the bleeding wasn't stopping fast enough. "Come on, buddy," Dante murmured, his voice low, almost desperate. "You're not done yet." Elliot paced the small apartment they had holed up in, his hoodie soaked, his fingers twitching at his sides. He had been quiet since they fled the garage, but now he spoke, voice edged with something between fear and urgency. "We can't keep running like this." Dante didn't look up. "You got a better idea?" Elliot swallowed hard. "Yeah, I do." A dangerous proposition. Elliot sat on the edge of the rickety table, hands clasped. His expression was serious, all traces of the nervous kid from before gone. "Vincent's got a warehouse," he said. "It's not just some drug den or a fight ring. It's his real operation, where he keeps everything, files, money, connections, everything." Dante exhaled slowly. "And you know this how?" Elliot hesitated. "Because I used to run errands there." Dante finally looked at him. And what exactly are you suggesting? The kid licked his lips. We burn it down. Dante stared at him. Elliot shook his head quickly. Not literally, but if we get our hands on those files, we can expose him. Take him down for good. He's got people in his pocket, cops, officials, but he's not untouchable. Not if we give the right evidence to the right people. Dante glanced at Cerberus. The dog hadn't moved much. He was stable for now, but he wouldn't be fighting any time soon. This was insane. Breaking into Vincent's operation? Walking straight into the lion's den? Then again, what choice did they have? Dante sat back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You know where the files are? Elliot nodded. Top floor. Office in the back. Vincent's paranoid. Keeps records of everyone he does business with, just in case he ever needs leverage. Dante thought about it, weighed the risks. Then he sighed. Fine. We do this tonight. Into the wolf's den. The city was alive with neon lights and distant sirens, but in this part of town, the streets were nearly abandoned. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure on the waterfront, surrounded by chain-link fences and half-broken security cameras. Dante and Elliot moved fast, keeping to the shadows. Guards? Dante whispered. 2 at the front, 1 in the back, Elliot replied, and a few more inside. Dante nodded. Quiet. In and out. They slipped through the fence, moving low. Dante took out the first guard swiftly, a hand over his mouth, a precise strike to the temple. The man crumpled. Elliot took a shaky breath, but didn't hesitate as they moved forward. The door creaked as Dante pushed it open, revealing darkness inside. A hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by a few flickering bulbs. Footsteps echoed somewhere above. They moved quickly, sticking to the walls. The office was upstairs, just as Elliot said. They climbed the metal staircase as silently as possible, Dante leading, gun drawn. At the top, he cracked the door open. The office was cluttered, file cabinets, stacks of money, security monitors showing various angles of the warehouse. And then, bingo, a locked drawer. Elliot moved forward, pulling a small knife from his pocket. Give me a sec. Dante kept watch as the kid worked. Then, a click. The drawer slid open. Inside were thick folders, USB drives, ledgers filled with names and numbers. Elliot whistled softly. Holy shit. This is everything. Dante grabbed as much as he could, stuffing files into his bag. Then, a voice. Hey! Who the hell? They'd been spotted. The chase through the city. Gunshots erupted as Dante shoved Elliot forward. They bolted from the office, flying down the stairs as Vincent's men swarmed the warehouse. Run! Dante barked. They crashed through the back door into the alley, footsteps pounding behind them. The streets blurred past as they sprinted, bullets ricocheting off brick walls. Elliot stumbled, nearly losing his footing, but Dante yanked him forward. Through an abandoned lot, down a side street, into another alley, a dead end. Dante cursed under his breath. They needed an out. Fast. Then, a dumpster. He grabbed Elliot by the collar. In. What? Dante didn't wait for an argument. He shoved the kid inside, climbing in after him just as their pursuers skidded to a stop nearby. They held their breath. Seconds stretched into eternity as the men searched, barking orders, kicking over crates. Then, silence. After a long minute, Dante peeked out, clear. They climbed out, breathless. We need to move, Dante said. Now. Delivering the kill shot. They reached their destination 30 minutes later, a small diner, empty except for one man sitting in the corner, stirring a cup of coffee. Agent Monroe. He was older, hair graying at the temples, but his sharp blue eyes hadn't lost their edge. Dante dropped the bag on the table. Monroe raised a brow. What's this? Vincent's empire, Dante said. You wanted dirt? You've got it. Monroe exhaled slowly, flipping through the files. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. This is enough, he admitted. Enough to bury him. Dante leaned forward. Then do it. Monroe nodded once. Consider it done. The end, or just the beginning? The arrest happened fast. By the time the sun rose, Vincent was in cuffs, surrounded by flashing red and blue lights outside one of his clubs. His men had scattered like roaches, his operations dismantled within hours. Dante, Elliot, and Cerberus watched from a distance as police loaded Vincent into the back of a squad car. For the first time in a long time, Dante felt like he could breathe. Then, Vincent turned. Their eyes met. Despite the blood on his face, despite the zip ties cutting into his wrists, Vincent smiled. And then he said it. I have friends, Dante. This isn't over. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away. Dante exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Elliot shifted beside him. That didn't sound good. No, Dante muttered. It didn't. Cerberus, still weak but standing, pressed against Dante's leg, ears twitching as if he too could sense it. This wasn't over. Not yet. And Dante knew, deep down, that the next fight was already waiting for him in the shadows. The city had moved on. The headlines ran for weeks. Crime boss Vincent taken down in federal sting operation, underground dog fighting ring exposed, end of an era for one of the city's most notorious criminals. But Dante knew better. The real monsters never disappeared. They just waited. Picking up the pieces. The auto shop had seen better days. The front door was still splintered from the break-in. Bullet holes dotted the walls like a road map of the past. But Dante had started fixing it up piece by piece, because that was what he did. He built things back up, even when they were beyond repair. Cerberus lay on an old blanket near the workbench, his breathing steady but slow. His fur had begun to grow back where the stitches had been, but the massive scar across his chest would never fade. Dante sat beside him, running a hand gently over the dog's head. You got lucky, he murmured. Cerberus let out a low huff, his tail twitching weakly. They had both gotten lucky. A new path. Elliot showed up that afternoon, carrying a beat-up backpack and a stack of old books. Signed up for classes today, he announced, dropping his bag onto the counter. Dante raised an eyebrow. Vet school? Elliot smirked. Well, it's just a start. Some basic courses, animal care, rescue operations. Figured it's about time I did something that doesn't get me shot at. Dante exhaled, nodding. He wasn't the sentimental type, but he felt something close to pride seeing the kid finally clawing his way out of the life he had been trapped in. Elliot sat down across from him, glancing at Cerberus. How's he doing? Dante ran a hand through his hair. Stubborn as hell, like always. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel uncomfortable. You sticking around? Elliot asked eventually. Dante took a long sip from his coffee before answering. For now? Elliot nodded. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew. This wasn't over. Not really. The scar that wouldn't fade. The days bled into weeks. Dante focused on repairs, on the shop, on Cerberus, on himself. The nightmares still came, though. He still saw the look in Vincent's eyes as he was hauled away. That smirk. That warning. Dante had learned long ago that some people didn't know how to let go of grudges. And Vincent? Vincent wasn't done with him yet. Neither were the men he had left behind. But Dante had fought worse things than ghosts before. The shadow in the alley. One evening, after the shop had closed, Dante sat on an old wooden chair outside, a bottle of whiskey balanced on his knee. The air was cold, the kind of sharp chill that crept into your bones if you let it. Cerberus lay at his feet, half asleep, his ears flicking at the distant sounds of the city. For the first time in a long time, things almost felt quiet. Then Cerberus growled, not a warning growl, not a low, uncertain noise. This was deep, serious, a sound that meant something was wrong. Dante didn't move right away. His fingers tightened around the glass in his hand, his eyes flicking toward the alley across the street. And there, standing just outside the reach of the street lamp, was someone watching. The figure was still, silent, a shadow among shadows. Whoever they were, they had been standing there for a while, waiting, watching. Dante didn't speak, didn't call out. He just stared back, unblinking. After a long moment, the figure took a step backward. Then another. And then, slowly, they turned and walked away. Dante exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders. He set the whiskey down and cracked his knuckles, feeling the tension creep back into his muscles. Cerberus was still growling, his body coiled, ready. Dante reached down, running a hand along the dog's back. "I know, buddy," he murmured. "I see them too." He sat there for a while after the figure had gone, staring into the darkness of the alley. He had rebuilt his life before. He could do it again. But the past never really stayed buried. And as much as he tried to ignore it, Dante knew the truth. The war wasn't over. It was just waiting to begin again. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Dante knew that shadows never truly disappeared. They just moved, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as long as there were people like Vincent, men who thrived on power and control, there would always be another battle waiting in the dark. But for now, Dante, Cerberus, and Elliot had survived. And sometimes survival was enough, at least for tonight. But what would you have done in Dante's place? Would you keep running or stand your ground, knowing the past would always come back for you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories of loyalty, survival, and the fight against the darkness, make sure to subscribe. Because in a world like this, every choice matters.
Eleanor barely noticed the cold night air as she reached for the door. Reaper was back, right on time. But something felt off, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Not one, not two, three. She hesitated. The porch light buzzed faintly, casting just enough glow to reveal them. Same stance, same eyes, same scar. Reaper stood still, watching her. The others did too. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had never seen them before, but somehow they belonged here. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a crisp bite in the wind as Eleanor reached for the doorknob. The town of Ravens Hollow, nestled in the remote outskirts of Portland, was always eerily quiet after dark. Too quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She exhaled, adjusting the heavy-knit cardigan around her shoulders. Reaper was late. Her German shepherd had always been a creature of habit. 2 years since she had adopted him, and every evening he followed the same routine, disappearing into the surrounding woods just after sundown, returning like clockwork an hour later. Eleanor had long given up trying to stop him. There was something primal in his instinct, something untamed. Tonight, however, was different. She had been listening for the familiar sound of his paws against the gravel, but the night stretched on in suffocating silence. Eleanor frowned, glancing at the clock. 1:23 a.m. Too late, far too late. A chill skated down her spine as she stepped onto the porch. The dim porch light flickered weakly, casting long, jagged shadows across the dirt path leading into the trees. And then, there he was. Reaper emerged from the darkness, but he wasn't alone. Eleanor's breath caught. 3 figures moved in tandem with him, stepping into the pale glow of the porch light. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The way the light hit them, the way their bodies shifted in unison. But no, It wasn't an illusion. They were real, and they were identical. Same lean, powerful build, same sleek black coat, absorbing the dim light, same alert ears, same calculating gaze, even the same scar, thin, barely visible, running along the front left leg, her stomach twisted. What the hell? The air felt suddenly thick, oppressive. She took a slow step back, her fingers tightening on the door frame. Reaper didn't bark, neither did the others. They stood still, eyes locked onto her, their breath forming faint puffs of mist in the cold night air. She swallowed hard, pulse hammering against her ribs. This didn't make sense. It wasn't possible. Eleanor ran through the explanations in her head, grasping for something logical. Maybe they were just strays. Maybe they belonged to someone in town, a breeder, a rescue. Maybe, but no. There was no breeder in Raven's Hollow. There was no one nearby who owned dogs that even remotely resembled Reaper. These weren't just lookalikes. They were exact copies. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reached out, hesitating before calling softly, "Reaper?" Her dog didn't move. He simply stood there, head high, gaze locked onto hers with something unreadable behind those dark amber eyes. The others did the same, perfectly still, perfectly silent. Eleanor's throat tightened. It was wrong, all of it was wrong. Then, from somewhere deep within the forest, a howl cut through the silence. Not from the 4 dogs in front of her. No, this came from somewhere beyond them. Distant, echoing. Something stirred in the trees. A presence, watching, waiting. The porch light flickered again, casting the 4 figures in shifting shadows. Eleanor's grip on the doorknob tightened, her skin crawling with a feeling she couldn't name. She wasn't just being watched by these dogs. There were more, and they were not alone. Her breath hitched. What the hell was happening? Where did these dogs come from? Why did they look exactly like Reaper? And most terrifying of all, why did they just stand there, watching her, waiting? Eleanor took an instinctive step back, her breath shallow as the cold night air curled around her like a phantom's whisper. The 3 dogs followed Reaper inside without hesitation. Not cautiously, not timidly. They walked in as if they belonged here. Eleanor's grip on the door tightened. The wooden frame felt solid beneath her fingers, grounding her against the surreal nightmare unraveling before her. Reaper still hadn't made a sound. Not a growl, not a bark. Just that unwavering stare, sharp and unreadable. And the others, they moved like him. Same measured steps, same posture, same silence. The only sound was the soft click of their claws against the wooden floor as they entered her home like ghosts returning to a place they had never truly left. Eleanor hesitated, then reached for the flashlight on the entryway table. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she flicked it on. The bright beam cut through the dimly lit space, landing on one of the newcomers, and Eleanor stopped breathing. The flashlight trembled in her grip as she took in the thin, jagged scar running down the front left leg. Exactly like Reaper's. Her stomach twisted violently. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. She swallowed against the bile rising in her throat and slowly, cautiously, turned the beam to the others. Same scar. A sharp chill ran up her spine. They hadn't just been injured in the same place. They had been marked. Her mind reeled, scrambling for explanations. Some horrific accident? Some twisted experiment? Some kind of genetic defect? No, this was deliberate. Someone had done this to them. A quiet, sinking feeling settled in her chest. She had found Reaper 2 years ago at a rundown shelter on the outskirts of town. He had been lean, quiet, with sharp eyes that tracked her every move. The shelter worker had given her very little information, just that he had been found wandering near an abandoned property with no records, no past, no microchip. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Strays showed up all the time, right? But now she couldn't stop thinking about it. Was Reaper really just a stray? Or had he escaped from something? The flashlight beam flickered slightly as she exhaled shakily, forcing herself to speak. "Reaper, come here." Her voice was steady, but inside, her nerves were on fire. Reaper didn't hesitate, but neither did the others. All 4 dogs moved together. Eleanor's pulse hammered. It was unnatural. Not like a pack following an alpha. Not like animals moving out of instinct. It was precise, synchronized. She took another step back, and the four of them halted in unison. A trick of the light? A coincidence? She wasn't sure anymore. Carefully, she crouched down, keeping the flashlight steady. One of the dogs, the one closest to Reaper, tilted its head, watching her exactly the way he did. Slowly, she extended a hand. The dog did not react. No sniffing, no shifting, no hesitation. It was like touching a statue. She let her fingers graze its fur. Same coarse texture as Reaper's. Same muscle structure, same breath, slow and steady. It was him. It was all of them. A deep, suffocating fear wrapped around her ribs. She withdrew her hand quickly. Her thoughts spiraled. This wasn't just strange. This was impossible. Her gaze flickered to the scars again, to the way they didn't just look identical. They were identical. And Reaper still hadn't barked. Not once. Her mind screamed at her to do something, to act, to force a reaction, to prove that this was still real, that she hadn't stepped into some twisted hallucination. Instead, all she could do was whisper, voice hoarse, "What happened to you?" None of them moved, not even a flicker of recognition. And then, a sound broke the silence. Not from them, from outside. A distant, drawn-out howl, low and deliberate, echoing from the tree line. Eleanor felt a sharp pang of dread coil in her stomach. The sound was wrong. Not wild, not primal, purposeful. And somewhere, deep in the pit of her gut, she knew. There were more of them. She turned back to the dogs, her pulse hammering against her ribs. They hadn't reacted to the howl. Had they been expecting it? Her fingers dug into the edge of the door frame. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. Eleanor didn't sleep. She couldn't. Not after what she had seen. The house was steeped in an eerie silence, save for the rhythmic breathing of the four identical dogs lying near the fireplace. Not sleeping, not restless, just existing. She sat at the kitchen table, her laptop glowing in the dim room, fingers flying across the keyboard. There had to be an explanation. Some logical, scientific reason why four identical German shepherds, down to the exact scar on their legs, had appeared at her doorstep. Her first instinct was to check for reports of missing animals. If these dogs belonged to someone, some breeder, some rescue, there had to be records. She scoured every missing pet database she could find. Nothing. She expanded the search to include strange occurrences, unusual animal sightings, stolen dogs, lab experiments, anything. Still, nothing. The sense of unease coiled deeper in her stomach. This didn't make sense. Dogs don't just disappear without a trace. She rubbed her temples, exhaling shakily. And then, a thought struck her. She had never checked Reaper's original adoption paperwork. Not really. She had signed the forms 2 years ago, never questioning the vague backstory the shelter had given her. Reaper had been found wandering near an abandoned property, with no chip, no records, nothing. At the time, she had assumed he was just another stray. But now she wasn't so sure. Her heart pounded as she got up and went to the cabinet where she kept old documents. Fumbling through the pile of receipts, vet bills, and paperwork, she finally pulled out the adoption folder. The pages were slightly yellowed from age, creased at the edges. Her eyes scanned the form quickly, skipping past the generic details. Name, Reaper, breed, German Shepherd, age, approx, 2 years. And then, her pulse stopped. At the bottom of the page in tiny, almost unreadable print was a note. Specimen number 045. Status, escaped. Specimen. Not dog, not rescue, not stray. Specimen. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Escaped? From where? She stared at the word, her fingers tightening around the paper. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. She set the paper down with a trembling hand and turned back to her laptop, opening a new search tab. Specimen 045, Lab Testing Portland, Experimental Breeding Programs, Illegal Cloning Projects. Her mind was spinning, but the results were frustratingly vague. Nothing concrete, nothing obvious. But then, a pattern began to emerge. A series of stolen dogs, mostly German Shepherds. Over the past 7 years, reports of purebred German Shepherds vanishing had surfaced across different areas. Some taken from homes, some from shelters, some even from police K-9 units. And they were never found again. Her stomach twisted. Reaper wasn't just a rescue. He was part of something bigger, something deliberate. She turned toward the four silent figures lying near the fireplace. Their golden eyes reflected the dim glow of the laptop screen, watching her with eerie patience. Her skin crawled. They weren't here by accident. They had come for Reaper. But why? The air inside Dr. Daniel Carter's clinic was thick with antiseptic and something else, a quiet tension that had been building from the moment Eleanor stepped through the door. It was well past midnight, but she hadn't hesitated to wake him. Daniel had been her trusted vet for years, one of the few people she truly relied on in Raven's Hollow. If anyone could tell her what was wrong with these dogs, it was him. Now, standing in the dimly lit exam room, Eleanor watched as he carefully adjusted the overhead lamp, shining a focused beam into the golden eyes of one of the three identical dogs. The animal didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react. Daniel's brows furrowed, and he reached for a different light, one with a softer red-tinted glow, moving it across the dog's pupils. Then, suddenly, he froze. His breath hitched so faintly that if the room hadn't been silent, Eleanor wouldn't have noticed. She did. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the metal exam table. "What?" she asked, her voice low. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped back, rubbing a hand over his mouth, his normally composed expression shifting into something unreadable. Eleanor's stomach clenched. "What is it?" she pressed. Daniel slowly exhaled. Then, in a voice carefully controlled, he said, "Eleanor, this is not a normal dog." A shiver ran through her. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked, but she already knew the answer wouldn't be something she wanted to hear. Daniel picked up a medical tablet from the counter and tapped through a few screens. He turned it toward her. X-ray images. The first was of Reaper, a scan from his last checkup nearly a year ago. His skeleton was strong, normal, healthy. Then Daniel swiped to a fresh scan. One of the three new dogs. Eleanor gasped. At first glance it was the same. Same bone structure, same density. But then, the scars. They weren't external injuries. They were surgical. Thin, deliberate incisions that ran along the rib cage, the spine, even the skull. Daniel swiped again. Another X-ray. Another identical set of surgical scars. Another. The three dogs were exactly the same, inside and out. Eleanor felt cold. What the hell am I looking at?" she whispered. Daniel hesitated, his jaw tensed. "These dogs." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice dropping lower. "They've all undergone the same procedure. Identical. Precise." Eleanor shook her head. But why? What kind of procedure?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he swiped again, this time pulling up something else. A thermal scan. Eleanor's pulse spiked. A normal dog scan would show heat distribution, organs, blood flow, circulation. But this? The three identical dogs had inconsistencies. The scan shouldn't look like this. Some areas burned hotter than they should. Some colder. As if something inside them wasn't natural. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "What were they made for?" she asked, voice hoarse. Daniel's gaze met hers. "That's the question, isn't it?" Her breath was coming too fast, her chest tight. "Daniel, tell me the truth. What am I dealing with here?" Daniel set down the tablet. His voice dropped even lower, his tone carrying a weight she had never heard before. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "have you ever heard of Evernight Labs?" Eleanor stared at Daniel, the name Evernight Labs rattling through her mind like a ghostly whisper. The way he had said it, quiet, cautious, heavy, sent a deep, instinctual chill through her. She had never heard of it, and that alone terrified her. Because something about the name felt wrong, as if it had been deliberately erased from the world. "Evernight Labs?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't look at her immediately. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face, his other gripping the edge of the counter like he needed to steady himself. "They don't exist," he said finally. Eleanor's pulse jumped. "What?" "Not officially," Daniel clarified, looking at her now. "No public records, no news articles, no legal documents. Nothing. If you try to search for them, you won't find them." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edges of the metal exam table. "That doesn't make sense." Daniel's mouth twitched into something bitter. "Oh, it does," he said. It makes perfect sense, because places like Evernight Labs, they were never meant to be found. A heavy silence settled between them. Eleanor felt lightheaded. She didn't want to ask. She had to. What do they do? Daniel hesitated. He glanced toward the dogs, Reaper and his 3 copies, still lying near the exam room door, still watching. He lowered his voice. They're beyond genetics, he said. Beyond cloning. Evernight was founded on the idea of biological enhancement, splicing, augmenting, designing new creatures entirely. Eleanor's skin prickled. You're saying they, what, build animals? Daniel's gaze flickered. Not just animals, he said. Eleanor's stomach plummeted. Her hands were cold. She barely noticed. This was bigger than she had imagined. You're saying they experiment on humans? She whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a drawer, pulled out his phone, and after a few quick taps, turned the screen toward her. A grainy, black and white image. A news clipping from nearly a decade ago. It was barely a paragraph long. A missing persons report. An entire family gone overnight, vanishing without a trace. The last place they were seen, a rural research facility on the outskirts of Portland. The name wasn't listed. It never had been. Daniel let the silence stretch before speaking again. People disappear, Eleanor, he murmured. Not just animals, employees, scientists, test subjects, anyone who knows too much. The room felt smaller. Eleanor forced herself to breathe. She turned back to the dogs. Reaper. The others. Were they really just animals? Or were they something else? Her heart pounded. You think these dogs were made there? She asked, voice unsteady. Daniel exhaled slowly. I think, he said carefully, that they weren't meant to leave. Eleanor's chest tightened. Reaper had escaped, and now the others had come to find him. Why? To take him back? Or to protect him? She didn't know, but she had to. And there was only one place that held the answers. She had to go to Evernight Labs. The night was thick with tension, wrapping around Eleanor like an unseen noose. She moved quickly, stuffing essentials into a backpack. Water, flashlight, first aid kit, a hunting knife she barely knew how to use. Reaper sat near the door, his amber eyes tracking her every move. The other 3 still hadn't left his side. They didn't sleep, didn't fidget, just lay there watching. Eleanor barely acknowledged the unease creeping up her spine. She was focused. She had to get to Evernight Labs. It was the only way. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, making the night feel alive. She pulled on her jacket, slung the bag over her shoulder, and reached for the door. That was when she felt it. A presence. Not from inside the house. Outside. Her fingers hovered over the doorknob, her breath hitching as a cold prickle ran down the back of her neck. Slowly, she turned off the porch light. Through the sliver of curtain, she peered out. And froze. A black truck sat idling at the far end of her driveway. No headlights, no movement, but it was there, waiting. Eleanor's pulse quickened. No one ever came this deep into the woods. No one. The nearest gas station was 10 miles away. She took a slow step back, her mind racing. Had they been watching her this whole time? The documents, the research, Daniel's warning. People disappear, Eleanor. A chill coiled around her ribs. She had to act. Without making a sound, she turned toward Reaper. Stay here, she whispered. But as soon as she reached for the door again, a voice cut through the silence. Low, cold, and right behind her. We warned you, Eleanor. Every nerve in her body locked. The words came from outside, but the voice, it was too close. She barely had time to turn before an arm locked around her neck. The grip was brutal, pulling her backward with inhuman strength. Her mind screamed. She barely managed to suck in a breath before the shadows swallowed her whole. Eleanor's consciousness returned like a slow, suffocating tide, dragging her out of the void of unconsciousness and into something far worse. Cold. The first thing she registered was the biting chill against her skin. Her wrists burned, tight restraints cutting into her flesh. She tried to move, but the leather straps wouldn't budge. Her breathing quickened. The second thing she registered was the room itself. Metal walls, dim, sterile lighting, no windows. It wasn't a basement. It wasn't a prison cell. It was a lab. A sound. Soft footsteps. Eleanor turned her head just as a man stepped into view. His hair was neatly combed, his white lab coat pristine, as if the horrors of this place had never touched him. He smiled. Not friendly, not cruel, just detached, like she was nothing more than an equation on a clipboard. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said smoothly. Her pulse spiked. He knew her name. "Who the hell are you?" she rasped. The man tilted his head, amused. "Someone who knows you very well," he said, "even if you don't remember me." The air thickened. Eleanor forced herself to stay still, to push down the fear clawing up her throat. Stay calm, stay in control. Her eyes flicked around the room. No obvious exits, no weapons within reach. The man stepped closer, folding his hands in front of him. "You've been searching for the truth, Eleanor. I think it's time you heard it." She didn't blink. "I already know what you do here," she said, her voice ice. "Evernight labs, genetic experiments, stolen dogs, maybe even people." The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Oh, Eleanor," he mused, "you have no idea how much of the truth has been buried." He leaned forward. "Tell me, did you really think you found Reaper by accident?" A sickening chill curled around her spine. Her fingers twitched against the restraints. The man's smile widened. "You didn't find him," he whispered. Eleanor's breath hitched. The air in the room felt thinner. Something was very, very wrong. "No, Eleanor," the man continued. "We sent him to you." The words slammed into her like a physical force. She stopped breathing, her thoughts fractured. Sent him to her? No, that wasn't possible. She had walked into that shelter. She had signed the papers. She had taken Reaper home, believing she had saved him. Hadn't she? The man took a step back, watching her closely. "You still don't remember, do you?" he asked softly. Eleanor gritted her teeth. "Remember what?" A pause. Then his smile disappeared. "You weren't supposed to leave, Eleanor." Silence. It stretched long, suffocating, pressing down on her like a weight. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "I don't understand," she whispered. The man sighed, shaking his head. "Evernight Labs doesn't just experiment on animals," he said, his voice turning clinical. "We test everything. Gene therapy, augmentations, enhancements." His eyes flickered, studying her. Eleanor's mouth was dry. "And humans?" she forced out. The man nodded. "Yes, humans." Her skin prickled. "Why are you telling me this?" His expression shifted. Not quite pity, not quite amusement. "Because you, Eleanor, are one of the only subjects who ever escaped." The room tilted. The walls suddenly felt too close. The cold metal of the chair bit into her skin, but she barely noticed it anymore. She felt weightless, disconnected. Her head shook before she could stop herself. "No," she whispered. No, I have a life. I have memories." The man's gaze didn't waver. Memories can be rewritten. A faint ringing filled her ears. Eleanor wanted to scream. No, that was impossible. She was Eleanor Shaw, 35 years old. She had grown up in Oregon. She had a childhood, a life before this. Her thoughts stuttered. Had she? Flashes of memories flickered through her mind. Moments that felt less like lived experiences and more like fragments of something implanted. Blurred edges, missing details, things she had never questioned before. Now they felt hollow. She looked up at the man with wild eyes. "Then tell me," she choked out. "Tell me what the hell I am." His lips parted slightly, as if about to speak. But before he could, the lights flickered. A low growl filled the room. Eleanor whipped her head around. At the far end of the room, near the sealed exit, Reaper. His eyes burned gold in the dim light. Behind him, the three others stood motionless, their bodies taut with silent fury. The man's expression darkened. "Ah," he murmured, "right on time." Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. Reaper had found her. But was he here to save her? Or something else? Her breath hitched. She suddenly realized these dogs weren't just clones. They weren't just watching over Reaper. They were protecting her. But from what? The air in the lab shifted. Not physically, not visibly, but in a way Eleanor felt in her bones. Something inside her mind cracked open, like a long-locked door suddenly left ajar. The man in the lab coat, his voice, his presence, was fading into the background. The white walls, the cold metal chair, the distant hum of machines, all of it blurred, because something else was clawing its way to the surface. A memory, a forgotten piece of herself. A small girl, no older than 6, curled up in a dark room, the scent of antiseptic stinging her nose, the soft whimper of an animal beside her. Not just any animal, a black German shepherd puppy, his tiny body pressed against hers, trembling. She remembered wrapping her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. His name had been Reaper. Eleanor gasped, the shock hitting her like a tidal wave. Her mind reeled, stumbling through the fractured images now spilling forward like flood waters breaching a dam. She had been here before. Not in this exact room, but somewhere deep in Evernight Labs. This wasn't her first time strapped to a chair. This wasn't the first time she had been a subject. Her throat went dry as she turned toward the man in the lab coat. "You knew," she whispered. The man smiled, tilting his head slightly. "Of course I knew." His voice was calm, almost amused. "Did you think you stumbled upon Reaper by chance?" he asked. "Did you truly believe we just lost track of one of our most valuable assets?" Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. The lab, the experiments, her mother's voice, whispering to her in the dead of night, telling her to be brave, telling her to run. And the alarms blaring, the cold hallways flashing red as she was ushered out, small hands gripping Reaper's fur as they escaped. She hadn't found Reaper. He had found her, again. After all these years, her breath came short, ragged. She looked toward the 3 identical dogs standing near the door, their golden eyes locked onto her. They weren't here to hurt her. They were here to help her escape. Again. Just like before. The man in the lab coat sighed, shaking his head. "It really is fascinating," he murmured, almost to himself. "The way memories resurface when the right triggers are present." Eleanor barely heard him. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Her mother had died getting her out, had given everything to make sure she was free. And yet, somehow, they had still found her. All this time they had been watching. Waiting. For what? To bring her back? To finish what they started? Her jaw tightened, fury burning away the last of her fear. She had spent years living a lie, thinking she was just Eleanor Shaw, an ordinary woman who had adopted a stray dog and built a quiet life. She wasn't. And now, she wasn't leaving here without the truth. She turned back to the man, her eyes narrowing. "You used me," she spat. His smile never wavered. "We saved you," he corrected. "We made you." Eleanor's fingers curled around the armrests of the chair. "No," she said, voice steady now. "My mother saved me. You stole me." The man only sighed. "That doesn't really matter now, does it?" Eleanor opened her mouth to respond. Then the lights flickered. A deep snarl tore through the air. The man turned, just in time to see Reaper lunge. The impact was violent. The chair tipped sideways as Eleanor threw herself out of the restraints, hitting the cold metal floor as chaos erupted around her. The 3 other dogs moved as one, closing in on the lab technician before he could even scream. Blood hit the floor. Eleanor ran. The world was on fire. Alarms shrieked through the corridors of Evernight Labs, a symphony of chaos and destruction. Red emergency lights bathed the walls in a flickering glow, casting long, jagged shadows. Somewhere above, explosions rocked the facility, sending shockwaves through the ground. The scent of burning plastic, ozone, and something darker filled Eleanor's lungs as she sprinted through the labyrinthine halls. She wasn't running alone. Reaper led the way, his powerful frame cutting through the smoke like a phantom. The 3 identical dogs followed, their golden eyes burning with the same primal instinct. Survive. Not just survive. End this. The lab was crumbling. Scientists and guards scrambled for safety, some pushing past each other in blind panic, others desperately trying to salvage data from melting computer screens. Eleanor didn't care. She wasn't running anymore. She had spent her entire life hiding from a past she didn't remember. She had spent the last few days chasing ghosts, trying to understand why her world had been turned inside out. Now she knew the truth, and she was going to burn Evernight Labs to the ground. A security team rounded the corner ahead, heavily armed, their eyes locked onto her instantly. "There!" one of them shouted. Eleanor didn't stop. She grabbed a fallen metal tray from the ground and threw it full force into the nearest emergency panel, A deafening klaxon wailed through the air as containment doors snapped open, and then the screaming began. The doors weren't holding test subjects anymore. They were holding monsters. Something massive burst from the darkness behind the soldiers, its flesh twisting unnaturally, a grotesque amalgamation of failed genetic experiments. The guards didn't stand a chance. Neither did Evernight. Eleanor ran. She could hear the foundation of the lab cracking around her, steel beams groaning under the weight of destruction. The exit was just ahead. One final corridor. One last sprint to freedom. And then, a gunshot. Eleanor stumbled, barely managing to dodge the bullet that ricocheted off the wall beside her. She turned. The man in the lab coat stood at the end of the corridor, his white clothes now streaked with dust and blood. His face was impassive, but his hand was steady on the gun. She didn't freeze this time. Neither did Reaper. The 4 dogs moved as one. They lunged, fast, precise, unstoppable. The man fired one more shot. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. Eleanor didn't wait to see what was left. She burst through the emergency exit, lungs burning as she tore into the open night. Behind her, Evernight Labs was collapsing in on itself. Flames licked at the sky, a beacon of destruction marking the end of a nightmare that had gone on for too long. But Eleanor wasn't done. Not yet. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the flash drive she had stolen minutes before everything had gone to hell. Years of evidence, names, projects, victims. Evernight had operated in the shadows for too long. Not anymore. She plugged the drive into her phone, fingers moving swiftly as she began to upload everything. To the press, to online forums, to everyone. With a final tap, she sent the truth into the world. For the first time, Eleanor let out a slow breath. It was over. By morning, the world would know everything. The community would rise in outrage. The authorities would have no choice but to investigate. Evernight Labs was finished. She turned, looking at the 4 shadows beside her. Her only family, her past, her present. Reaper stepped forward, pressing his forehead against her leg, a quiet reassurance. Eleanor reached down, fingers curling into his thick fur. For the first time in years, she felt free. The sun rose soft and golden, spilling across the rolling fields of the Silver Pines Rescue Center. Eleanor stood on the front porch, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, watching as the 4 shadows moved effortlessly through the grass. Reaper, Ghost, Shade, Spectre. Their sleek black coats glistened in the morning light, no longer weighed down by the ghosts of their past. They weren't running anymore. They weren't hiding. They were home. 3 months had passed since the fall of Evernight Labs. In that time, Eleanor had turned the remnants of her old life into something new, something good. The world had seen what Evernight had done. The investigations had been swift. Authorities had raided what little remained of the facility, pulling out the shattered remnants of their inhuman experiments. Some were saved, many were not. Eleanor had given her testimony, answered every question, stared down the ghosts of her past without blinking. And when it was done, when Evernight was nothing more than an exposed scar in the world, she had walked away. Not to disappear, not to hide, but to build something better. The old farmhouse she had purchased, a place once meant for solitude, was now the foundation of Silver Pines Rescue, a home for the lost, a home for them, a second chance for creatures the world had abandoned, a place for family. Eleanor took a slow sip of her coffee, feeling the warmth settle in her chest. Her family. She still wasn't sure what exactly she was, what Evernight had done to her, what she was meant to become, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. A bark cut through the crisp morning air. Eleanor turned just in time to see Ghost pounce on Spectre, the 2 rolling through the grass in a blur of tangled limbs and playful snarls. Shade watched from the sidelines, his ears flicking forward in amusement, and Reaper, always watching, always guarding, stood a few feet away, his golden eyes meeting Eleanor's. She smiled. For the first time in a long, long time, she felt it. Peace. She set her mug down, stepping off the porch into the open fields where they waited. No longer experiments, no longer fugitives, just a pack, just a family. And as Eleanor ran with them through the morning light, she knew she had finally found home.